You are listening to The Artist in American History. If you are listening to this podcast, please note that this is a special video presentation.
In 1915, D.W. Griffith, one of early cinema's masters, released The Birth of a Nation. This monumental film was both highly innovative and deeply racist, using the newest, most advanced filmmaking techniques of the time to enshrine a long-running and growing reinterpretation of that war. Note the noble dress of the white characters in this scene, their expressions of genuine fear. Note also the crude black-face makeup applied to most of the so-called African American characters depicted herein. And, lest we forget, the heroic, nightly shots of the Ku Klux Klan as they charge to the rescue. There is a lot going on here, a lot of racial coding that reflects how the history of the Civil War, how we understand that part of America's past, was contentiously being rewritten by some Southern sympathizers. The Union certainly won the war, but films like this help to illustrate how the South won the peace. As you watch this scene and listen to this commentary, consider this. The Birth of a Nation was a box office triumph, earning tens of millions of dollars in the first half of the 20th century. Indeed, its success was so great that its box office haul was not exceeded until the release of 1939's equally problematic and racially loaded Gone with the Wind. Uncontroversial, the early history of cinema certainly is not. Like all great pieces of film, The Birth of a Nation uses cues and hints to stir emotions and reactions in its audience. Consider the divergent actions and reactions of the attackers and the defenders in this scene. The white farmers show fear, courage and empathy for one another. The black Union soldiers, contrast, display an eager, vicious enjoyment as if the act of violence is one they revel in. They're almost animalistic, their passions inflamed by the prospect of bloodletting and the implied spoils of war. There are women in the house which is under attack, innocents in the parlance of that time, whilst those on the outside are men who thirst for something. Inside the cabin, its defenders fight what seems to be a hopeless endeavour, a lost cause if you will. The scene cuts to show the KKK as they ride to the rescue, a sea of white racing to confront a tidal wave of black. This scene symbolically represents a very particular interpretation of that war. The white victims in this scene hold each other, showing moments of easily relatable sentimentality and emotions, as if the filmmaker is saying, "See, this could have been you. These people are you. How dare you judge them?" In contrast, the depiction of African Americans in the scene seems as if it was designed to do the exact opposite. It seems to scream at the audience, "How dare you sympathise with them? Can't you see what they are? Can't you see who the real victims are?" This is Griffith at his most brutal and his most subtly blunt. The symbolism here requires little comment. The KKK are depicted as heroes, black Americans as monstrous villains, white Southerners as victims. The South was right, this scene seems to intone. In The Birth of a Nation, Griffith told his audience that it was white Southerners who were the true victims of the American Civil War. He vilified the North, ennobled the pre-war or antebellum South, and satirised the region's black population, depicting them as sexual predators, buffoons, and tyrants. The Civil War was, of course, the most violent conflagration in American history, and the white South did indeed suffer, but Griffith's film did more than acknowledge that reality. It turned it into the primary drama of the era, sharpening its emotional impact by completely misrepresenting the experiences of others, particularly the region's long-suffering black population. The Civil War was indeed a disaster for much of the white South, but it also brought the institution of slavery to an end and, briefly, empowered the region's African American population, giving them not only freedom, but some degree of political power and representation. As brutal, violent and bloody as the war was, it was an agent of long overdue change. The nature of that change was, however, deeply divisive in the racially codified South, and following the Union's victory, a significant post-war campaign was fought over the meaning of the war. That post-war process saw many recast the South's defeat into a travesty, the loss of a free and noble past to a tyrannical North and despotic African American coalition. The Birth of a Nation was that process's victory lap. Director D.W. Griffith seems to have been shocked, even repelled, by the accusations of racism and bias which some contemporary commentators rightly threw at him. So much so that his next film, Intolerance, sought to explore how bigotry and bias had negatively impacted human history. Regardless of all this, The Birth of a Nation was a smash hit, and its message was readily consumed and internalised by its vast audience. However Griffith felt following the film's release, The Birth of a Nation stood on its own, independent of its creator's apparently changing and even maturing view of intolerance and bias. It was a cultural juggernaut, filmmaking at its very best, technically speaking, while socially and culturally, filmmaking at its absolute worst.